Alright, this is the tutorial for the endocrine system, and it is one of 2 communication networks. The learning objectives today are: describe the negative feedback system that controls the hormone production, list the major endocrine glands and the hormones they produce, describe the functions of the pituitary gland, one of the major endocrine glands, describe the effect of the major hormones of the body, and then pretty much that's it. Okay, so the endocrine system. The endocrine system works with the nervous system to maintain a stable internal environment. Alright, so what are the functions? We're talking always about physiology is the functions and activity of the body. So here is the endocrine's functions. They help maintain homeostasis, which we learned in chapter 1 is the maintenance of balance or equilibrium in the body. They also help control body functions, such as maintaining your fluid balance, the direct growth and metabolism of your cells. They regulate sexual reproduction, as well as they play a role in the fight or flight response, which we learned about last week, alright, which is part of the sympathetic nervous system. So how does the nervous and the endocrine system maintain homeostasis? So both the endocrine and nervous system use chemicals to transmit their messages. One uses neurotransmitters and the other one uses hormones. Okay, and they use these chemicals in different ways. The nervous system has a fast response to stimulus. Okay, you know how nerves can transmit things very quickly, whereas the endocrine system has a very slow response to stimulus. So something stimulates, the hormone goes out, and it takes its sweet time getting to where it needs to be, but it's not as quick as if like when we step on a tack and our foot immediately withdraws, right? Okay, the nervous system also has a very short acting effect, whereas the endocrine system has a very long duration of effect. And then also the targets usually are for the nervous system muscles, so your voluntary muscles such as your skeletal muscle, right? And also some glandular tissues. The endocrine system has basically an effect on all tissues of the body via the bloodstream. And that's fantastic. So, the endocrine system. Here we have a little cat who's kind of showing all the different major endocrine glands, except for the kidney. That's not a major endocrine gland, so please note that. Right? It's just showing us. It does have some endocrine function, but it is not the major endocrine gland. Okay. The basic functional units of the endocrine gland, alright, was we learned back in chapter 3 when we were learning about tissues. Alright, the endocrine system had they're part of the epithelial tissue, right? They are these ductless glands. They produce and secrete hormones, which are the chemicals, alright, and then those chemicals are secreted into bloodstream, which is right next door to it, okay, and then those go out to the rest of the body and to these different targets and cells and things, alright? Its other friend, they see endocrine versus exocrine. So the exocrine glands, those are another epithelial tissue, okay? Exocrine glands, like your sweat glands, alright? Mammary glands, alright? These secrete substances into epithelial surfaces. So you see, epithelial surface, right? Sweat comes out onto your skin, right? Okay, they have ducts that go to the outside world, whereas these don't have any ducts that go to the outside world. Okay? Alright. The major endocrine glands, alright? So, we have the anterior pituitary gland, a posterior pituitary gland, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla, the pancreas, the testes, and the ovaries. These are your major endocrine glands, as you're going to learn them in this class. Okay? You have a chart and a cat that looks like something like this. Alright, and we'll be filling these out as we go along. So, if you want to, you can write these in. Okay, they correlate with the letters of the animal, which we'll see in a couple slides here. Alright. let's talk a little bit about hormones. Hormones, again, are those chemical messengers produced by the endocrine glands. They are secreted directly into the blood vessel. Okay, so here's a blood vessel right here, capillary, and there's blood circulating, and then there's little tiny hormones in. They're able to cross over the capillary, okay, and into tissue, and these are target cells, and there's some that don't have receptors that fit this. So these are non-target cells versus these would be what we call target cells. So here they connect up, alright, and then they can do different things to these guys, alright. So once they find their target cell, they can produce effects, alright, that are specific to that cell. And let's move along. Alright. So what are the things that they can do? They can change the permeability of a cell. What does that mean? I mean, when we talked about when we were in the club, you know, we were dancing in the club and only certain things could get in, some sodium could get in, or carbon dioxide could get in. Well, hormones can come along and change the whole scene and say, alright, glucose, all the glucose can go into the cells. Alright, it can go into the club. So that's what they mean by changing permeability of a cell. So they can change the membrane process in which things get crossed over. Permeability of an organelle. Okay, we made our little organelles out of candy. Remember, we had the Golgi apparatus, we had our ribosomes, and we had all those different kinds of endoplasmic reticulum. All right, rough and smooth. Right. So they can change the permeability of those organelles too, making them to do more of one thing. Maybe say they increase the rate at which proteins are made on the endoplasmic reticulum. Right? They can activate or inactivate an enzyme system, so they can shut things down and say, nope, don't let this reaction happen anymore. We're not making that anymore. They can also change the rate of enzyme production, so they can increase how much a reaction is happening. So, or they could decrease the rate at which the reaction is happening, slow things down. So hormones are pretty cool for little tiny things in our body. All right. How do we control these little tiny things? All right, we can't just have them floating around and causing havoc all over the place. Our bodies would be a mess, right? So to maintain that homeostasis, we have to have some checks and balances. There's negative feedback system, there's a positive feedback system, and those usually counteract each other. And then we have another kind of third one, which is a direct stimulation from the nervous system. Okay, and we'll talk about that one as in relation to flight or flight response. So let's first talk about negative feedback system, which how most are controlled, and they prevent like an over-secretion of the hormone. And then we'll talk about positive feedback, which stimulates more hormone to be secreted. Excuse me. Alright, so the negative feedback system. So here's an example over here. You may have to look in your book at this. There is an example in your book. It's exactly like this, okay? If you just follow along, I'm going to talk you through it here, okay? So here's your little blood vessel right here, and your body is reading this, the levels, okay? And your body says, whoa, we are low on blood calcium. We need calcium. We need more. So the next step is there's a positive signal sent out to the parathyroid glands, which are in charge of calcium. And so it's thyroid gland. They kind of have this relationship between the two. Okay, so there's a release of parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid gland. Okay, so hormone is released, and it's positive, right? And it says, hey, bone, that's where we get most of our calcium from. That's where we store our calcium, right? As we learned in our tissues, our connective tissues, that bone does store calcium. It's one of its functions, okay? It says, hey, break down some bone so that we can have more calcium in our blood. So it breaks down that bone, all right? It talks to these osteocytes, okay? Osteoclasts and osteoblasts, all right? And it says, break down bone so that we have more calcium, and it deposits it into the bloodstream, right? And that increases the blood's volume of calcium. And as soon as that happens, the body can read that again and say, ooh, let's send out a negative signal back to the parathyroid gland and say, hey, we're good. We have enough. You can stop sending the signal this direction to break down bone. We can stop that. Alright? It's pretty clever. It's amazing. It's amazing what the body can do. It's amazing how it was created. So, a positive feedback example would be when somebody is having or giving birth, having a baby, giving birth, okay? The central nervous system, the hypothalamus, secretes down into the posterior pituitary gland, secretes oxytocin where it is stored down here, okay? And it gives a signal via these nerves, and it says, release this into the blood. Release this thing called oxytocin. And oxytocin causes uterine contractions. Well, we need uterine contractions to expel the fetus. Alright, so it gives that positive, says contract, and that contraction goes up to the nervous system again and says, yep, there's contractions, let's keep going. So it sends this positive loop all the way, and it keeps going, so they stimulate more oxytocin to be released, which gives us more contractions, and this keeps going until the fetus is expelled. So that is an example of a positive feedback system. Alright? It encourages what we say a deviation from normal. Alright? A direct example would be the fight or flight response. Okay, these are secretion of hormones that is stimulated by the sympathetic nerve impulse. Okay, there's a nerve that goes all the way down to that adrenal gland next to the kidney, right? And it is under what we say neural control, which means nervous control, right? And it sends a signal down from the brain to that spot, and it says release epinephrine and norepinephrine, and that's released in the bloodstream. And we saw a small video in class the other day about that, when that man was talking about how the guy was jumping out of the way of the car, and he talked about epinephrine. Okay, well, that's exactly the same thing that we were talking about. Okay, alright, so it provides an immediate response to an urgent situation. Alright, him jumping out of the way of the car was not the epinephrine part. It was when he came back and his body's like heart pumping, all that good stuff. That is the effect of epinephrine. Okay, the jumping out of the way was just pure reflex getting out of the way. Okay, alright, so let's move along. Okay, hopefully you've filled out your major endocrine glands. Alright, if you really would like a page to look at in your book, page 360, alright, page 360 is a whole list. It says major endocrine gland table, and it's got everything, basically the hormones, the targets, and the actions. And this is very succinct. This is what you should look at. This is what you should, if you want to write it in, write it out. If you want to write along as we go, that's another option too, as we talk about these things. So, again, to reiterate, okay, this is part of the neuroendocrine system. The ones with the boxes are the major endocrine glands: pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, pancreas, testes, and ovaries. Okay, those are the majors. This is part of something separate, but it is very much connected. Okay, the hypothalamus is very much connected to this. Alright, so if you want to take a second, alright, here's our hermaphroditic kitty. Alright, you can see up here in his brain, this is the pituitary gland. Alright, and as we move down here, number B, I should say letter B, alright, we have the parathyroid. Alright, and this green glob here is the thyroid. Okay, move on to D, so we got the kidney or renal, and then we got this little gland here which is adjacent to the kidney, we call the adrenal gland. And here we got just kind of wandering out in space. Okay, this is our pancreas. And then up here we have an ovary, and back here we have a testis. Alright, so we filled out our cat. These letters will correspond with the letters on your chart. So A is pituitary, so anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. Alright, B will correspond with the parathyroid. Alright, you can see how those correlate and fill those out if you wish. Alright, the hypothalamus. It's located in the diencephalon of the brain. If you can remember back to last week when we were talking about parts of the brain, right? There was the cerebrum and the cerebellum. Okay, well there's this part in the middle we call the diencephalon, right? And it's composed of the hypothalamus and the thalamus. So the thalamus is above it, and the hypothalamus, hypo meaning below it, okay? The hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus has many important nervous system functions. It is a link between the conscious mind with the rest of the body. That is like a fantastic statement, because when we talk about feeling better and thinking good thoughts and feeling better and placebo effects, okay, we can consciously sometimes control how we feel and make ourselves actually more well by using positive thinking versus negative thinking. Alright, so it can have an effect on your body. Conscious mind can have an effect on the rest of your body. You know, a lot of people think, you know, it's just Western medicine that will make you feel better. It is, I would say, 80% of the time. Alright, 90 to 80% of the time you're going to feel better. But there is a link of that conscious mind saying, yes, I am feeling better, I am going to do better, this is going to work out. Alright, so there is a conscious link. Controls activities, the hypothalamus controls activities of the pituitary gland. Okay, so the hypothalamus is right above here, and then it's right underneath here. This is the pituitary gland, okay? And when you get into anatomy and physiology, you'll actually dissect out the brain, you'll get to see the pituitary gland, okay? And inside the pituitary gland there is a system of tiny blood vessels, alright? There's capillary system in here, right? There's all these tiny cells in here that are part of the pituitary gland that have different kinds of hormones in them. Okay? This is the anterior portion. This is what that looks like. And in the posterior portion, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. We'll get there first, okay? So there are these nerves that come down here. They're linking right here directly into the stalk, right, to the blood system. Okay, and it gives us good connection. So these hormones can go straight down into this system right here and affect the cells down here. Okay. Alright, you'll see this diagram right here. Okay, as we go along, after you're all done, which I want the pituitary gland, okay, I want you to be able to go through and you'll see all the different hormones we're going to talk about. You should be able to say growth hormone and its target cell. Okay, so you should be able to go, the growth hormone, what cells does it hit? What is it, where is it heading? Who's it going to affect? The adrenocorticotropic hormone, where is that headed? What's that target cell? So using your book and this PowerPoint, you should be able to go from here to there and figure out where all these are their target cells. Okay? Page 360 will help you put your answers into that too. Alright? You should be able to do that. You need to fill these out. Alright? You need to have these for class next week. Okay, the pituitary gland. There are two separate and very different parts. Okay, we have the anterior and the posterior pituitary gland. This is very glandular tissue in the anterior. Okay, lots of glands, lots of cells. Right? And then the posterior part is more nervous tissue and storage of these hormones back here, okay? And they're all attached to the hypothalamus by this slender stalk here. So, the hypothalamic control of the anterior pituitary gland. So we're going to talk anterior first. So we got the modified neurons in the hypothalamus that secrete into that blood vessel, and they release factors that can be releasing or inhibiting. So we got It's releasing or inhibiting factors that are going to go through here and say, ooh, release this. Or they're going to come through here and say, no, do not release any more of that. Alright, so that's where all those negative and positive feedback systems usually come to hit. Factors are specific for particular pituitary hormones, right? So one or the other is secreted to continually adjust the circulating hormone levels by turning off or turning on production of particular hormones. That's kind of the whole goal of that. So the posterior pituitary gland, now they're a little bit different. See, they have these neurons that come down into here, okay? They have this nervous tissue that goes through the stalk and down. And there are only two hormones that live in the posterior pituitary gland. And they're made up here in the hypothalamus, and then they travel down this nervous tissue and are stored in the posterior pituitary gland. And when nervous signal comes down, it says, hey, release that stuff I've been storing down in here into your blood. Alright, that's what happens, okay? It's a little bit different than the other one we saw where they had a couple nerves coming to the stalk here and releasing chemicals like neurotransmitters and going into the blood, and then some hormones traveling to here releasing and inhibiting effectors, okay, and saying, alright, you cells down here release this and that, alright? Whereas this is just stuff stored down here and the nervous tissue hits it and says, go, get out into the blood, okay? So we call the pituitary gland the master endocrine gland, alright? So that's one that you should remember, highlight that, okay? The master endocrine gland is the pituitary gland. You will probably see that on a quest someday, alright? Many of its hormones direct activities of other endocrine glands. So a lot of them, okay, as we're looking at here, a lot of these guys direct activities in other of the other major endocrine glands. Alright, this one does, that one does, okay, so we got some good stuff there. Alright, so there are two separate and very different parts. We're talking about the anterior pituitary already, and we've talked about the posterior pituitary. The anterior has 7 known hormones that it produces, and the posterior only has 2. Okay, and they're made by the hypothalamus and they're stored there. Alright, the anterior pituitary is mostly glandular tissue, so like endocrine gland tissue. Alright, and it makes the hormones right there in that part of the pituitary gland, and then they're secreted, alright, or not secreted according to the direction by the hypothalamus. Alright, so you can get out your chart and start filling in your chart as needed. Alright, so we've got the anterior pituitary has the growth hormone. Okay, now we're in the second column here of the hormones. Okay, you can fill in your hormones. Alright, so if you want to fill in growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, prolactin, melanocyte. Okay, and then come over here to the posterior pituitary. Okay, and you can fill in the antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. So the growth hormone, alright, so in simple terms, the growth hormone is known as somatotropin and somatotrophic hormone. Okay, that's not very simple, right? So let's just call it the growth hormone. They promote body growth in young animals. So great, we love growth. Okay, see, literally it tells you what it does. The hormone promotes growth. Alright, it helps regulate metabolism of proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and all body cells, and promotes protein synthesis for ongoing regeneration and repair of tissues, release of lipids from the fat tissue for energy production, and discourages cell use of glucose for energy. So in essence, it affects all cells, okay? right? If you look at your chart on 360, it gives you a really good general, okay? I don't need you to remember all of these things, okay? That's wonderful if you could, but that's a lot of information. So you just need to know that this is growth hormone. It affects all body cells, targets all of them, and what are the actions of it? Growth, metabolism, and regulation. Okay? Growth, metabolism, and regulation. Alright, prolactin. Next one on our list here. Okay, it helps trigger and maintain lactation. So we're for lactin, prolactin, alright? So maintaining lactation in the target cell for these guys, this is the female, is the mammary gland. In the male, there really is no effect. Okay, so don't really need to talk about the males. We just think about when we think about women or cows, right? Okay, lactation is the action, right? Milk secretion by the mammary glands. So production and release continues while the teat or nipple is stimulated by nursing or milking. So when we place the couplers on the cow, right, to take the milk, actually the first thing a farmer will do before they put that on there is they stimulate the teat, alright, they clean it up, get it stimulated, and that releases prolactin, which will cause lactation to continue, right? Stimulates. When stimulation stops, the milk production stops, and the mammary gland returns to its non-lactating size. So, should you stop milking a cow, right? If you don't milk them, then they will dry up, as we call it. Okay. Here we got thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, so it actually stimulates the thyroid. Ha! That's nice, right? Okay, the stimulus stimulates the thyroid growth, development, and activity. So it's basically the target cell is the thyroid gland, and its action is to promote thyroid hormone production. There you go. That's simple terms, right? Increases production of thyroid gland hormones. Secretion is regulated by feedback from the thyroid gland. So the hypothalamus sends out a little signal and says, hey, you should put this out there. This thyroid, it sends out a thyroid releasing hormone. It says, you should send out some TSH, some thyroid stimulating hormone. And it's like, okay. So it goes here, and then it goes to the thyroid gland, alright, in that neck of the cat, alright, and then that sends out T3, T4 as inhibitories. Check back to the pituitary and says, hey, look, we did it. And this guy says, yep. Goes up to even to the hypothalamus and says, yep, we did it. So this is the positive, this is the negative, right? It checks back to itself. It says, all good. The adrenocorticotropic hormone. That's a big word, but if we word it, if we break it up, okay, if you use your terminology and break things up, okay, you can break this down. Ick, alright, and then adrenocortico, okay, tropic, okay, so the cortex of the adrenal gland, right, that's where we're headed, right, and it's exactly, it says stimulates growth and development of the outer layer, the cortex of the adrenal gland, okay, stimulates release of the hormones produced by that adrenal gland, alright, and cortisol is one of those that happens to be related to that. So the target here is the adrenal cortex, and the action is adrenocortical hormone production, alright. So regulated by the feedback from the adrenal cortex, it can also be released quickly as a result of stimulation of the hypothalamus and other parts of the body. We call it ACTH, okay? It is an abbreviated form of this. Follicle stimulating hormone, okay? Stimulates follicles. where are follicles? Follicles are in your ovaries, alright? If you've never heard that term before, but that is where your ovaries, they're the incubator, they're the place where the egg lives inside the ovary. You have many follicles if you're a female all throughout your life, and as you grow they take turns becoming the one who gets to go out into the world, okay? So they grow, they stimulate the follicle growth, alright? So, stimulates follicles to produce and secrete estrogens, the female sex hormone that prepares the female for breeding and pregnancy. In the male, it actually stimulates sperm development. So in the target, alright, is the female, the target is the ovary. In the male, the target is the testes. Okay? And what is their action? We say their action is oogenesis. Oogenesis, if you can remember back to your terminology days, oogenesis is the production of eggs. Alright? Spermatogenesis would then be the production of sperm. Okay? So those are the actions. Alright, the luteinizing hormone. This is what completes the follicle development process. Alright? So, the luteinizing hormone, the target is the ovary, and in the males it is the testes. Okay? So the female, it actually hits the follicle and what we call the corpus luteum. Alright? This is, the corpus luteum is the spot after they ovulate. There is a spot that is left over. It becomes what we call, like, that follicle kind of hemorrhages, and it becomes what we call the corpus hemorrhagum, and then even further along the way it becomes white, and we call it the corpus luteum. Alright? The white body. So that is just in general. Alright? So that part is left over, called the corpus luteum, and so it will hit that, and it will allow the action to happen of either ovulation or the corpus luteum production. Alright? In the male, the testis is the affected target, and the testosterone is what is produced. Alright, and then our final one that we're going to look at is the melanocyte stimulating hormone. Alright, we really don't know what the target cell is, and we have no idea what the action is. So, there you go. And we do know that melanocytes are associated with skin color change. So, check. Alright. Moving on to the posterior pituitary gland, we have the antidiuretic hormone, and it's stored in the pituitary gland. Stored there because it was made up in the hypothalamus. Alright? What is the antidiuretic hormone? What is its target cell? Its target cell is the kidney. Okay? So, the kidney is where it's going to be target, and the whole purpose of it is water conservation. Alright? Diuresis is the loss of large amounts of water through urine. So we're going to try to stop diuresis. So ADH prevents water loss. So if the hypothalamus detects that there's dehydration, it stimulates the release of ADH. And ADH acts on the kidneys, and it says, hey guys, we need to keep some water around, so if you could not urinate so much water out, that would be great. And that's when you look down in the toilet and you're like, whoa, my urine is really, really yellow. Alright? And that's because your ADH is working and you are conserving water, which is fantastic. Alright? There are diseases that have a deficiency in ADH, and this is called diabetes insipidus. So, whoever has that one, you can look that up. Alright, oxytocin, the other, and the posterior, so we're on the back side of the pituitary gland, the posterior pituitary gland. Alright, this acts on the uterus. It acts to contract and smooth muscles. It also, what it does in the uterus, okay, is released, it can stimulate contractions needed to help sperm move towards the egg after breeding, or even contractions needed for during birth, as we talked about earlier. It also has an effect on mammary glands to stimulate milk letdown. So it's pretty fantastic because the act of nursing after giving birth will have twofold effect. The oxytocin will let down milk for your young, as well as at the same time contract your uterus and bringing it back to a normal size. It's pretty fantastic. It's awesome creation. Alright, so you should be able to go around this pituitary gland now and be able to hit what are your target cells. What is the growth hormone's target cells? All the cells. Alright, so go through this, make sure you've got your answers to all 10 of these. Alright, we're going to move on to our other, we got just the pituitary gland is a big one. That's why we call it the master gland, because it's got a lot, 9 hormones to think about. Alright, now we're going to move on to another major endocrine gland, the thyroid gland. Okay, thyroid gland being right about here. Alright, the 2 lobes are located on the ventral neck. They produce 2 hormones, the thyroid hormone, okay, which help regulate the body's metabolic rate and processes, and they also produce calcitonin. So those are the 2 hormones, and you can fill in your chart, right? Okay, you put your thyroid in there. I believe C is thyroid, right? And you can fill in your 2 hormones, right? And so, what is the thyroid hormone? It helps regulate the metabolic process. Calcitonin helps as it's calcium, okay, helps regulate blood calcium, and it increases calcium deposition in bones. So we got 2 forms. We've got T3, T4. T4 is produced in greater abundance than T3, and T4 is mostly converted to T3 before producing its effect on target cells. And it regulates the metabolic rate of cells and helps generate heat and maintain constant internal body temperature. So the thyroid hormone, in essence, it hits all, its target is all body cells, and it prevents, in general, not prevents, but in general it's involved in growth, metabolic processes, and regulation. So the thyroid hormone has many effects. As you can see here from this diagram, look at all the things it can do. So it has many effects. Calcitonin maintains proper blood calcium levels, right? Calcium involved in nerve impulses, calcium is involved in blood clotting, milk secretion, formation, maintenance of your skeleton, right? And calcitonin so basically prevents hypercalcemia. So calcitonin, its target is the bones, right? And it prevents it prevents hypercalcemia. So it prevents you from getting too much calcium everywhere. All right, hypercalcemia. All right. And on the other link, okay, we've got the parathyroid gland. So fill in here. B is your parathyroid gland. All right. The hormone that is produced by the parathyroid gland is the parathyroid hormone. Okay. And its target is kidneys, all right, the intestines, and the bones. And its job is to prevent hypocalcemia. And this is the ways in which it does that. It'll stimulate the kidney to conserve calcium, not excrete it out into the urine. It says, hey, intestines, absorb more calcium from this diet. And then it also can pull calcium for your bones, as we learned earlier when we were looking at the negative feedback system. Okay. The adrenal glands are located near here, the kidney, right? The cranial ends of the kidney. There are 2 very different parts. We have the adrenal cortex, which is the outer portion, and then we got the adrenal medulla, which is the inner portion. And they kind of look like a little bit of like a triangle shape. Okay. So we've got the cortex, and then we've got the medulla, right? Alright, so the adrenal cortex is the outer portion. It's got this granular tissue, and it secretes steroids. And then the inner portion is that nervous tissue. We talked about the fight or flight hormones, the epinephrine and the norepinephrine. So when it goes into the center, it releases those, and you get that fight or flight. Your eyes dilate, you're ready to fight, you're ready to run, whatever you're going to do. Alright? Whereas the cortex is stimulated, you're secreting steroids such as like cortisol. Alright, here we go. We can look at them on this page. So the many steroids, alright, we've got sex hormones like aldosterone, alright, the corticosteroids, which are cortisone, cortisol, cortisterone, alright, and these do a lot of good things, okay. And then you've got your mineral corticoid like aldosterone, okay, as talked about before, estrogen, testosterone, alright. Okay, and aldosterone is related to our kidneys, alright, and it helps with regulate levels of certain electrolytes in our body, such as sodium, potassium, hydrogen. So, the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex, right, you can fill those out, target hormones, okay. They have the glucocorticoid hormones and the mineral corticoid hormones and some sex hormones, alright, and pretty much all those are whole body except for the mineral corticoids, which are, this is kidney, okay, whole body, kidney, alright. And if you're looking at your adrenal medulla, the epinephrine and the norepinephrine, the target is the whole body, alright, and their part of their action is the fight or flight response. So, whole body, alright, the action is the fight or flight response, and the hormones are epinephrine and norepinephrine. Boop, boop. Okay. Pancreas, moving on to third to last one, is located near the duodenum, alright, and the stomach and the duodenum. It makes a nice little, when you get to anatomy you'll be able to look at this in better and understand. But just right now, just accept the information that it is located near the duodenum, which comes off the stomach. Alright? Has both exocrine and endocrine functions. That's a good thing to remember, right? It does two very different things. Okay, that's it can be secreted. It can secrete things right out into the intestines, or it does an endocrine function where it secretes things into blood vessels, hormones into blood vessels. Okay. The endocrine component's the one we're going to talk about, and it's only a small percentage of the organ's total volume, because insulin is vital to life, right? Insulin, we always think insulin, glucose, diabetes. Okay, those are the words we hear together. So what does that mean? All right, to you, we're learning about the pancreas. The hormone we're learning about is insulin. Its target is all body cells, right? And the function of insulin, all right, is to move glucose into the cells, and it's also part of using it for energy. Okay, the glucose has to be moved into cells because glucose goes through that whole thing called glycolysis, right? Pyruvate, right? We learned about the breakdown of all those carbohydrates and things like that. Okay, we learned that's where we get our energy. All right. All right. So we got these little things called pancreatic isolates of Langerhans, alright, groups of cells scattered throughout the pancreas. There's alpha, beta, deltas, alright. The alpha cells secrete glucagon, beta cells, insulin, and delta cells, somatostatin. So here's the stomach, here's the duodenum, and there's the pancreas. So you can see it's got a blood supply here, and then there's little things that can go right out into the intestine from the pancreas, and they can secrete right into the intestine. And that's how it's exocrine this way and endocrine through the bloodstream. So, insulin moves glucose, amino acids and fatty acids from the bloodstream into cells. It lowers your blood sugar or your glucose, alright? Glucagon is the opposite. It stimulates the conversion of glycogen to glucose by the liver, and it stimulates gluconeogenesis, and it raises your blood sugar. Alright? And somatostatin is the one that inhibits the secretion of insulin, glucagon, and somatotropin, and it diminishes GI activity. So this is kind of like the check and balance of these guys. Right? These guys kind of go off of each other, and this guy controls both of those. Alright? You just need lots of checks and balances here. So, if you're looking at the pancreas, alright, we've got the insulin and the glucagon for your hormones, and all the body cells, alright, whole body, that's your effect, that's where their target is, and The insulin, again, we talked about the movement of glucose into the cells and its use for energy. And glucagon is going to, as we talked about here, increase your blood sugar, right? Stimulates gluconeogenesis. Neo meaning new growth, genesis, new making of glucagon, right? Glucose. Alright. Finishing off, should be able to finish off with your chart, okay? The testis and the ovaries, alright? We weren't going to talk too much about reproduction, but in general, the testis, the hormone is the androgen, the ovary, we've got estrogens and progestins, alright? They have an effect, testosterone has an effect on the whole body for estrogen, and then progestin is just the uterus, alright? And the actions of these, of course, they make a lot of sense when you hear about like testosterone, the androgen, testosterone. The anabolic effect it has is development of male secondary sex characteristics. Example, when you castrate a male lion, they won't grow a mane because they need that testosterone in order to grow the mane. So. And then we've got the estrogens, which are the preparation of breeding, and the preparation for maintenance of pregnancy would be the progesterone. So, alright, good luck. Make sure you fill out the rest of your chart, alright? And don't forget to fill out this guy too. Okay? Alright, we'll talk to you later.